The air up in the high country of Colorado does not just get thin. It gets hungry. It is a place of jagged granite and ancient pines where the wind screams through the needles like a dying animal. You can stand on a ridge and feel the weight of the mountains pressing against your chest. A physical presence that knows you are there even when you think you are alone. We like to imagine these wild spaces are our playgrounds. But the truth is much colder and far more indifferent. Some things go into those woods and they simply stop existing in the way we understand. They become part of the silence. Part of the shadow that never moves, even when the sun is at its peak. 1958 was a year of supposed innocence. A time when parents thought a summer camp was a sanctuary for their children. Camp Saint Malo sat tucked under the shadow of Mount Meeker. A sprawling expanse of rock and ice that looks down on the world with a stony, unblinking gaze. Among the boys, there was a 10-year-old named Bobby Bizup. He was a quiet kid. A boy who lived in a world of muffled sounds because of a hearing aid he wore tucked against his ear. He was small for his age. And maybe that made him an easy target for whatever waits in the places where the light fails to reach. It was the 15th of August. A Friday that should have been filled with the smell of pine needles and the sound of laughter. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the peaks, casting long, distorted shadows across the campgrounds. Bobby had been out by the creek, just a short distance from the safety of the main cabins. He was supposed to be coming in for dinner, joining the other boys as they gathered for their evening meal. But when the bell rang and the voices rose in the dining hall, Bobby was not among them. He had vanished in a span of time so short it felt like he had been erased from the earth with a single stroke. The counselors did what they were trained to do. They checked the bunkhouse, the latrines, and the edge of the woods. They called his name, their voices echoing off the granite walls of the canyon. But the only answer was the rustle of the wind. Panic is a slow burn that turns into a wildfire. And by the time the sun had dipped below the horizon, the camp was in a state of absolute terror. They brought in the local authorities. Men who knew the terrain and the dangers it held for a small boy with limited hearing, but searching for a child in the dark of the Rockies is like looking for a single needle in a sea of broken glass. By the next morning, the search had ballooned into something massive and desperate. Hundreds of volunteers, National Guard troops, and seasoned mountain rescue teams swarmed the slopes of Mount Meeker. They moved in lines, shoulder to shoulder, sweeping through the underbrush and over the scree slopes. They looked for a scrap of clothing, a footprint, anything that would suggest Bobby was still out there. But the mountain remained silent, offering nothing but the cold bite of the morning air. It was as if the boy had stepped off the edge of the world and into a void where physics no longer applied. They brought in the bloodhounds, animals with noses that could track a scent through a hurricane. They were given Bobby's clothing to sniff. And for a moment, there was hope. But the dogs acted strangely, their tails tucking between their legs as they reached certain patches of the woods. They would circle a spot, whine, and then simply sit down, refusing to go any further. It is a detail we see over and over again in these cases. The animals sense something that our human eyes cannot perceive. They smell the wrongness in the air, a predator that does not leave a scent or a footprint. The weather in the high country is a fickle beast, and it turned mean just as the search was hitting its stride. Thunderstorms rolled over the peaks, dumping sheets of freezing rain and hail on the searchers. The temperature plummeted, turning the ground into a slick, dangerous mess. A 10-year-old boy in light summer clothing would not last long in those conditions, not without shelter. And yet, the searchers found no signs of a camp. No broken branches. No disturbed dirt where a boy might have huddled for warmth. He was just gone, swallowed by the very earth he had been playing on. There is a strange phenomenon in these disappearances, a sense of geographical displacement that defies logical explanation. Bobby was last seen near the creek, a flat, accessible area near the heart of the camp. To get anywhere dangerous, he would have had to climb, and climb hard. He would have had to navigate through dense thickets and over boulder fields that would challenge a grown man. Why would a child, especially one who struggled to hear, wander away from the only sounds of safety he knew? It suggests a lure, A silent call that pulls the vulnerable away from the light and into the deep dark. Weeks turned into months, and the snow began to fall, burying Mount Meeker under a thick, white shroud. The official search was called off, the investigators shaking their heads in frustration and grief. Bobby's parents were left with a hole in their lives that no amount of prayer could fill. They lived in that agonizing limbo, the space between hope and the crushing weight of reality. The case went cold, becoming just another ghost story whispered around campfires in the summers to come. But the mountain was not finished with Bobby Bizup just yet. Nearly a year had passed. It was June of 1959, when a group of hikers stumbled upon something that should not have been there. They were high up on the slopes of Mount Meeker, at an elevation of roughly 10,500 feet. This was an area far above where a small boy could have reasonably wandered on his own. In a crevice between the rocks, they found a small, weathered hearing aid. It was Bobby's, and nearby, scattered amongst the rocks and the sparse alpine grass, were his remains. But the condition of the site was something that chilled the blood of every investigator who saw it. The spot where Bobby was found was nearly 2,000 feet higher than the camp where he vanished. To reach it, he would have had to travel miles through some of the most punishing terrain in the park. He would have had to cross steep ridges and navigate through areas that even experienced climbers avoid. How does a 10-year-old boy, lost and alone in the dark, manage to climb that high? The physics of the journey do not make sense. It is as if he was carried or moved by a force that does not care about the limits of human endurance. When the investigators processed the scene, they noticed more anomalies. Bobby's shoes were missing. His socks were gone, and his clothing was found in a state that did not match the passage of time. Some items were neatly folded. Others were tucked away, as if they had been placed there with intent. This is a recurring theme in the missing 411 files. The removal of footwear and the strange positioning of clothing. It implies a state of mind that is not just lost. It is altered. Or perhaps it implies something else entirely. Something that undresses its prey before it is finished. The most disturbing find was Bobby's skull. It was found sitting atop a rock, almost as if it had been placed there on display. There were no signs of animal scavenging, no teeth marks, no broken bones that would suggest a fall. It was clean, bleached by the sun, and sitting in a position that felt entirely too deliberate. Predators do not leave skulls sitting on pedestals. Nature does not arrange remains in a way that feels like a grim monument. It felt like a message, a silent statement from whatever had taken him in the first place. The hearing aid itself was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It was found resting on a ledge, undamaged and clearly visible. If Bobby had fallen, or if he had been attacked by a bear or a mountain lion, that fragile device would have been crushed or lost in the brush. Instead, it was sitting there, a tiny piece of technology that had failed to protect its owner from the silence of the mountain. It serves as a haunting reminder that our tools and our senses are useless against the things that operate outside our spectrum of understanding. The official report hinted at exposure. Perhaps a fall? But the investigators knew the math did not add up. There were no predators in the area capable of carrying a boy that distance without leaving a trail of blood or torn fabric. A mountain lion would have cached the body in a much different way. A bear would have left a mess. What we are left with is a vacuum. A total lack of physical evidence that points to a natural cause of death. It is the signature of the unseen. The mark of a predator that leaves no trace, because it does not belong to the world we know. Think about that night in August. The absolute silence that must have descended on Bobby. With his hearing aid failing or being removed, he was trapped in a world of static and shadows. The wind would have been a vibration in his chest. The cold, a biting pressure on his skin. Did he see something moving in the trees? Did a figure emerge from the darkness? A shape that looked human until it got too close. We want to believe he was just a lost boy. But the mountain tells a different story. A story of a hunt that ended high above the clouds. There is a theory about these spots. These high-altitude locations where children are found. Some call them portals. Others call them hunting grounds. There is a strange consistency in the terrain. Boulder fields, granite peaks, and proximity to water. Mount Meeker fits the profile perfectly. It is a place where the veil between what we know and what we fear seems to be at its thinnest. Bobby Bizup did not just walk up that mountain. He was pulled into its orbit by something that thrives in the thin air and the jagged rocks. The authorities back in the late 50s did not have the tools we have now. But even with modern technology, these cases remain unsolved. They could not explain how he got there. And they could not explain why he died. The autopsy was inconclusive, the bones offering no clues to the trauma that ended his life. It was as if his life force had simply been sucked out, leaving behind a husk for the hikers to find a year later. The files were closed, the boxes tucked away in a basement. But the questions remained like a cold draft in an empty room. We like to think we are the masters of our environment, that we can map every inch of the wilderness and stay safe. But the case of Bobby Bizup proves that we are just guests. And sometimes, the host is hungry. We go into the woods with our GPS and our gear, thinking we are prepared. But Bobby had the best searchers in the country looking for him. And they walked right past his final resting place dozens of times. He was there, and he was not there, existing in a state of superposition until the mountain decided to let him be found. There are things in the woods that do not have names. They are the shadows that move when you are not looking. The sudden chill that hits you on a warm afternoon. They are the reason the dogs will not track. And the reason the children disappear without a sound. Bobby was vulnerable. A quiet boy in a loud world. Maybe that made him stand out. A soft light in the darkness that something decided to extinguish. The mountain did not kill him. Something on the mountain did. And it is still up there, waiting for the next summer camp to begin. When you look at the work of investigators who track these disappearances, the Bizup case is a cornerstone. It has every hallmark of the phenomenon. The sudden disappearance, the impossible terrain, the missing clothing, and the discovery in a previously searched area. It is not an isolated incident. It is part of a map of tragedy that spans the entire continent. From the Cascades to the Appalachians, the same story is told over and over again. Only the names of the victims change. For the family, the discovery brought no peace. It only brought more questions. How did their little boy suffer? Was he scared? Did he call for them in a voice he could not even hear himself? The cruelty of the mountain is that it never gives you the full story. It only gives you fragments. A bone. A shoe. A piece of plastic. It leaves you to fill in the blanks with your worst nightmares. Bobby's story ended on that high ridge. But for those left behind, the nightmare never truly ends. Today, Camp Saint Malo still stands. The stone chapel looking out over the valley. People still hike the trails and marvel at the beauty of the Rockies. But if you know the story, you can't help but look up at the peaks and feel a shiver. You look at the boulder fields and wonder what is hidden in the crevices. You listen to the wind and wonder if it is carrying the sound of a child's voice. We are never as safe as we think we are. And the wilderness is never as empty as it seems. The case of Bobby Bizup remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the history of the national parks. It is a reminder that there are forces at work in the world that do not follow our rules. We can search, we can investigate, and we can theorize. But at the end of the day, the mountain keeps its secrets. Bobby was a boy who went fishing and ended up as a ghost on a mountain peak. A transition that should not be possible. And yet, it happened. Bobby is not alone in his fate. His story mirrors the disappearance of Jared Atodero in 1999, another young boy who vanished in the Colorado wilderness and whose remains were found years later in a location that seemed impossible for a child to reach. Both boys were found high above where they went missing. Both cases involved missing clothing, and both left investigators with more questions than answers. These are not accidents. They are a pattern. A grim tally of the souls that the mountains have claimed and never truly returned. As you sit in your warm room, listening to this, remember that the darkness is only a few miles away. The woods are deep, and they are filled with things that have been here much longer than we have. Bobby Bizup is still out there in a way. A part of the granite and the wind. Be careful where you wander. And be careful who you listen to when the sun begins to set, because once you step off the trail and into the shadow of the mountain, there is no guarantee that you will ever come back.